countries around the world grappled with a cocktail of shocks and economic turbulence in 2025, from ongoing conflicts and economic uncertainty to catastrophic weather that tested communities. Yet, in the face of these challenges, nations have proved far more resilient and adaptive than predicted. In this episode of the Development Podcast, the World Bank Group looked back at what shaped the year 2025 and looked ahead to 2026 and beyond.
Would have to actually be the resilience of the economies and the countries that we work with. Because as you say, if you look back, it's been a year of uncertainty, turbulence, and one thing that's been pressing on our minds, of course, has been the high level of indebtedness in countries around the world. But what we've also seen is that the outlook or the performance on growth has actually ended up being a bit better than we expected as the year went through. We were quite worried. But we've seen that growth has actually been quite strong. And of course, it's not strong enough, but developing countries have performed quite well. So we're hoping to end the year at about 2.7% global growth, which is where we thought we would be at the beginning of the year. And then we had all that turbulence and uncertainty. So that's good. The second thing is that we've also seen that countries are starting to see an easing of inflation, which is good. And it helps, of course, on populations. And the other thing is that there's a bit of softening on the access to finance in terms of terms. So bond markets have opened up a bit more, which is also good. But ultimately, what we've really seen is that countries have been relatively quick to adapt and seeing that they need to digitize, take opportunity for new opportunities like AI and digital that it offers, but also the shift in markets and diversification. So a tough year, not enough growth for sure, but better than we were at one point anticipating it to be.
Thank you, Anna.
I've got to agree with Anna on this. Like, if you think back to the beginning of the year, we thought things could be much worse. I know it may not feel that great for many people around the world, but actually it's a lot better than things could have been. Philanthropy really stood up in a big way, and we now have several philanthropists that are bigger than individual countries in terms of their annual giving. And that gives us some hope as we try to construct this new future in 2026.
But all great reasons to be hopeful and positive at the end of this year. But looking back also, what do you think, Raj, are one of the challenges that developing countries continue to face?
Well, they face a whole host, right? Whether it's the tariffs or the debt overhang. Most of these countries are really facing massive debt, or inflation, as Anna mentioned. If you talk to ministers of finance, they're not seeing a pretty picture right now. They feel like they are constrained. It's a very tough environment. Aid cuts, have hit a number of countries as well. I'd say the biggest thing is just the uncertainty. The environment feels really uncertain. There's a lot of geopolitical tension, and countries are trying to face this uncertain environment with very few tools and figure out what to do. That's why institutions like the World Bank are so important in a moment like this.
Anna?
I totally agree. There's so many challenges happening and at the same time. And I have to go back for a moment just on debt, because we're monitoring this so closely. And if you look at the last 3 years, developing countries actually paid more than they received. And this was 3 years in a row. And that's really hard at a time when fiscal space is already small and there's so much need for development. And add to that resources for development, of course, are in a position where we're seeing a lot of competing demands for development support around the world. So that is difficult. But what I also, and I think our institution heard, and it also actually led to a huge push for us to set a North Star, is that everywhere you go, whether it's a low-income country, a middle-income country, or even a higher-income country, the issue of jobs is everywhere. And it's either because there's not enough jobs, or population is asking for better jobs, or there's change to the job nature. So everyone is concerned about this. Add to that the fact that there's a demographic shift happening, particularly in Africa, where you have a massive emergence of young people coming out on the job market in working age. We estimate about 1.2 billion over the next 10 years. So for us, we really set an articulation of our overall mission, which is to create jobs. And we thought about it in a very structured manner, which we've never done before, by the way. Jobs has been something we have focused on, but we have never operationalized it the way we have now, which is we're looking at what pillars need to be in place: foundational infrastructure, enabling policies and regulation, and then private capital mobilization. And then we identified 5 sectors, if you will, that we think are conducive to job creation. So infrastructure, we believe that the whole area around healthcare, both for healthy population, but also the jobs it creates. We believe that agriculture is huge in many countries we work in, but it needs to be higher productivity. We believe that a value-added manufacturing that has a really strong local component can do it. And then tourism. So we are really shaping our strategies around the world around this idea of jobs. We're mobilizing partnerships around it, and we're trying to really focus on this concept of 3 pillars that enable and 5 sectors that can help create the jobs, and by investing in those.
Thank you, Anna. Very insightful as always. Raj, you've spoken already about the shrinking foreign aid budgets across the globe, as well as philanthropy stepping in. How else have development organizations adapted to this new landscape?
I mean, some of them are adapting in the only way they can, which is to cut. You know, they're firing people, they're shutting down offices, they're closing programs and projects. Whether they're effective or ineffective, they're just closing them. Their budget doesn't allow it. I think there are others, fewer, but there are others that have some other resources. They have other sources of funding, they have assets, and they are using this as a moment to really reimagine what they do and to think about how can we have more impact than we had in the past. Now that we don't have the constraints of so much government-based funding, are there other ways we can adapt our business model? Can we act more like a social enterprise? And so a lot of the nonprofit CEOs I speak to are really thinking about adapting in those ways. And it's a very tough time. I'm not trying to sugarcoat that, but they're thinking about how do you take this moment of crisis and turn it into some kind of an opportunity. And I think that's a kind of a reckoning happening across the space. When you talk to leaders across this space, this is what they're working on and thinking about, is how do you adapt in a new environment?
Can I add to that?
Please.
From the World Bank Group's point of view, I think it's such an important point because, of course, we're also operating in this environment. And what we've really thought about is we have to be extremely efficient as an organizations. We have to think about how we make sure the resources that we have for our clients, but also for our administration of the World Bank Group, has the most impact. So that means that we think much more now as a World Bank Group. And that is because the public sector side that I oversee, IBRD and IDA, has to enable much more of the private side, which we believe is the growing part of the pie. And that's what countries need. We also know that jobs get created more through the private sector than the public sector. So it makes a lot of sense. So I'm working so closely now with the team at IFC, with Mokhtar, and of course the team at MIGA to see how do we craft solutions together that really maximize the impact of the public sector side so that the private can take a bigger share. The other thing that we're seeing is this partnership needs to also extend externally. If we want to have real impact in the countries, we need to mobilize partners. So now we're working so much better as a system, I would say, as an MDB system. So we have, MOUs with of practically everybody, and we're trying to focus on major initiatives like Mission 300 or AgriConnect, or most recently the 1.5 billion people we want to reach with better health.